Okay, so either God is not all loving or he is not all powerful because we see in our world pain and suffering. And so if he loves us, why would he allow pain and suffering? Probably because he's not all powerful. But if he is all powerful, then he's definitely not all loving. So this is the premise for a logical contradiction for the idea of God, especially through Christianity. The question that I ask when I hear this objection is it possible for God to allow pain and suffering to bring about good? Or on a much more basic level, is it possible for pain and suffering to bring about good in any way? And I think the obvious answer to this is yes. And I've seen this especially in my life. There's things that were really hard to go through, but afterwards I look back and I don't necessarily wish those things hadn't happened because it did bring about better good. So I think it is logically possible for God to allow pain and suffering because he could be using pain and suffering to be bringing about a greater good. And I think Christianity lays this out really beautifully. The story of the Bible is about characters who go through pain and suffering, like Israel and their entire, story of exile. And that's kind of a lot of the stories in the Bible is people trusting in God when it's not favorable. And we see this all throughout the Bible. I mean, basically all the stories are, trusting God even when things are bad and thanking the Lord even when we don't see his plan. We just trust in him. I mean, I imagine back to the Colosseum and the Christians being thrown in to fight to the death. And they didn't say, oh, God's not real because I got thrown into the Colosseum. But rather, Christianity lays out the fact that there is pain and suffering. So in my mind, the problem of evil doesn't really seem like much of a problem to me, but rather a mystery. Because I think it's really hard for us, from each of our own perspectives to try to determine why exactly everything is happening the way that it is. We have the 80 years on Earth out of thousands and thousands of years of creation, and it's hard for us to put everything in scope and say, wow, this is great. So sometimes, when we're in our lives, things are going to look really bad. However, through that, we have God's promise that he will work all things for good, and we just have to trust in that. But from an atheist point of view, I think that the problem of evil is not a logical contradiction, but rather speaks to the probability of God. Because we could say, well, maybe all the evil is for a reason, but it doesn't seem probable due to the severity and the nature of it. But one thing I want to add just to put this into perspective is the fact that evil actually contributes to the validity of God, because evil is just the absence of God. And, as people, we've decided to push God away as far as possible. And we see this in the fall of man, where we take the first step away from God and things, go south very fast. And then from then on, all of humans have been rebelling and have been basically just getting further and further away from God. So in my mind, when I see evil, pain, and suffering, I think of it as a reason to believe in a God. Because with all this evil, it's like, how do we explain this? How do we explain the fact that, kids are dying and natural disasters that kill thousands of people and, torture and the terrible things that we do to each other? How do we explain this? And I don't think we can say, well, we're just evolved, higher creatures, and it's just an unfortunate byproduct of natural processes. But really what it comes down to is the malevolence that we see in the world is very, very real and very, very powerful. And also the good in the world is very, very real and very, very powerful. As humans, we see the bad and good as a stark contrast. And we wonder, how could this be? We're almost hurt about it because things are so bad. This doesn't mean that God has forsaken us, but rather that we need God more now than ever. And this is kind of a appeal to an objective morality, because we all understand that things are objectively bad and things are objectively good. But if we are just evolved and we are just, a higher evolved fish, then how come somebody dying, way before their time, or somebody being murdered, how come these are, so horrific to us when all we should care about is survival of the fittest, right? So the very problem of evil and how, much we're appalled to evil, I think you could actually even use that as an argument for God. And again, I don't think that it's even possible to draw a logical contradiction between God being all-powerful and all-loving, but I think it's hard for some people to understand how their experience could be the result of an all-loving God. Hey, bro.
Hey, bro, how's it going?
Good, just working on a video.